A recording his own wife made in secret, his voices, his words, his empire, dismantled in 3 minutes and 47 seconds. He threatened a federal judge, bought her clerk, pressured her superior, planted evidence, leaked lies to every major outlet in the country. She documented everything, every threat, every move, every mistake he thought she didn't see. He spent 32 years believing money was the only language that mattered. She spent 8 weeks proving him wrong. The verdict came back in 4 hours. Guilty, guilty. He finally stood up, too late. He didn't stand up. That was the first thing. Victor Hale, 59 years old, worth more than most countries, sat in her courtroom on a Tuesday morning and refused to stand when she walked in. Not because he forgot, not because he didn't know the rule, because he looked at Judge Naomi Reeves and decided she wasn't worth standing for. He was wrong about that. But it would take him 8 weeks to understand exactly how wrong. Naomi had been awake since before the alarm. That happened on the big cases, not nerves, something more useful than nerves. A kind of precision that settled into her body the night before something important and sharpened everything. Her thinking, her patience, the particular stillness she had learned to hold in rooms where other people were losing their composure. It was 4:47 in the morning. The kitchen table held a 4-inch file and a cup of coffee that had gone cold while she read. She hadn't measured the file. She didn't need to. She already knew what was inside. The Hale case had landed on her docket 6 weeks ago, quietly. No press release, no fanfare. Just her clerk dropping a box onto her desk and saying, "This one's yours, Judge," the way you might hand someone a grocery bag. Routine. Ordinary. As if Victor Hale was just another name. He wasn't. Victor Hale was Hale Industries. 32 years of construction contracts, energy deals, government partnerships built from a starting point of nothing in a small town in Ohio. His face had appeared on the cover of 4 business magazines in the last decade. His company employed 11,000 people across 9 states. He had shaken hands with senators and cabinet secretaries and had the photographs to prove it, framed and hanging in a lobby in downtown Chicago that Naomi had never visited and had no interest in visiting. And he had been bribing federal officials for at least 7 of those 32 years. The evidence was in the file, all of it. Financial transfers disguised as consulting fees, shell companies built inside other shell companies like nesting dolls. Communications between Hale and 3 separate government contractors who had since agreed to cooperate with the prosecution. The case Damon Webb had spent 2 years building was thorough, and it was tight, and it showed in every page. Naomi turned a page, then another. She wasn't reading it for the first time. She had read it twice already. She read it the way she always read the serious ones, looking for the crack, the place where someone would try to slip something through. Because someone always tried. Outside, Detroit was still dark. Her neighborhood was quiet at this hour. She had grown up 12 blocks from here, in a house that was never quiet. 4 kids, 2 jobs between her parents, the television running through the wall at all hours because her father couldn't sleep and wouldn't say so. She had learned to think in noise. She had learned to hold concentration in the middle of chaos. Now, she had silence. She used every second of it. She closed the file at 5:30, rinsed her cup, stood at the kitchen sink, and looked at the photograph on the shelf above it. Her mother, 30 years younger, standing in front of the hospital, where she had worked night shifts for 2 decades. Scrubs, tired eyes. The largest smile Naomi had ever seen on a human face. She looked at that photograph for a moment. Then she put on her coat and drove to the courthouse before the sun came up. The thing about Victor Hale that nobody said out loud. He was not a stupid man. That sounds obvious. Of course, a man who built a billion-dollar company from a factory town in Ohio wasn't stupid. But there was stupid, and there was stupid. And the kind Naomi had learned to watch for in 30 years of legal work wasn't the kind that made obvious mistakes. It was the kind that made one very specific, very deliberate miscalculation and called it a strategy. Victor Hale had made his miscalculation the moment the charges were filed. He fired his legal team. Publicly. 3 weeks before his arraignment, he stood outside the federal building in a charcoal suit and told the cameras that he had parted ways with his attorneys due to philosophical differences regarding the nature of this persecution. He smiled when he said it. Easy, relaxed, the smile of a man discussing a minor inconvenience at a dinner party. Then he hired Jeff Strand. Jeff Strand was 62 years old and had been practicing federal law since before Naomi finished high school, known for two things: procedural precision and an absolute refusal to lose gracefully. He had successfully delayed 3 major federal prosecutions in the last decade, not won them. Delayed them until witnesses moved or lost interest or died, until juries couldn't hold the shape of what they'd heard, until a story got too old and too tangled for anyone to care about it anymore. That was the plan. Naomi could see the outline of it from the first week, but something else bothered her more. She found it 2 weeks before the first hearing, buried in the procedural records. A standard entry, a box that should have been checked. Hale's legal team had not filed for a judge reassignment. She read it twice, 3 times. Under federal guidelines, both parties had a window, narrow but real, to request reassignment after initial docket placement. Rarely used, but available. And in a case this size with this much at stake, any competent defense team would at minimum consider it. Strand hadn't just declined to file, he had explicitly waived the right. One line in the case record, filed by Strand's office: defense waives right to reassignment request. Waives, not overlooks, not forgets. Waive. Naomi sat with that word for a long time. Why would a man with every resource available to him, a man who had spent 2 years watching the government build a case against him, choose to keep the one judge he hadn't softened, hadn't worked around, hadn't had any contact with at all? The answer came slowly, then all at once. Because he didn't need to work around her, because he already had a plan that worked with her in it. She wrote one word on a notepad, circled it, tore the page out, and put it in the inside pocket of her briefcase. Then she went back to reading the file. The first hearing was on a Wednesday morning in October. The courtroom filled quickly. Naomi had expected press. High-profile cases always drew cameras outside, reporters in the gallery, the low hum of public attention pressing against the walls. She had run high-profile cases before. She knew how to manage a room. What she hadn't anticipated was the quality of the stillness when Victor Hale walked in. Not the stillness of tension, the stillness of theater. Like everyone present had been given a script and was waiting for the curtain. He wore a dark navy suit, no tie, silver hair cut close. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders, the kind of physical ease that took up space without appearing to try. He walked to the defense table and sat down, hands flat on the desk in front of him, eyes forward. He did not look at Naomi. She noted that. All rise. The bailiff's voice filled the courtroom. Everyone stood. Almost everyone. Naomi came through the side door and saw it immediately. Victor Hale, still seated, hands flat. Not looking around to check if anyone had noticed. Not shifting, not performing discomfort. He had noticed he simply didn't care. Or rather, he very much cared. He wanted something specific to happen next. She walked to the bench, sat down, arranged her papers, did not look at him directly. Be seated. The gallery settled. The court reporter's fingers hovered Mr. Strand. Her voice was level. Please advise your client that standard protocol in this courtroom requires everyone to stand when the judge enters. Strand leaned toward Hale. Whatever he said was quiet enough that it didn't carry. A beat passed, then 2. Then Victor Hale looked at Naomi for the first time. Direct, unblinking, like a man deciding something about the weather. Then he stood, slow, deliberate, each inch of it a statement, like was granting her something. Fine, she would take the inch. Thank you. She opened the file. Let's begin. The first hearing lasted 40 minutes, procedural, preliminary, the kind of session that existed to establish timelines and confirm discovery schedules. She had run 100 of these. She watched Strand work. He had a rhythm. Smooth, always one question ahead of where he appeared to be. He filed 2 early motions that seemed minor and weren't. Both were designed to complicate the discovery timeline in ways that would only become visible 3 months from now. She granted one, denied the second, watched Strand write something down. His face gave nothing away. Victor said nothing throughout. He sat beside Strand with the posture of a man attending a meeting he found mildly tedious. Not angry, not worried. Present in the way of someone who has already decided the meeting's outcome. Like he was waiting. When the session ended and the gavel came down, everyone rose. She stepped out. It was only later, reviewing the session recording alone in her chambers, that she paused on one frame. The moment right after the gavel. Victor Hale, half standing, turning slightly toward the back of the gallery. A small nod, not large enough to be obvious, large enough to mean something. She leaned closer to the screen. Then she sat back. Who was he nodding at? Carter Flynn had been her clerk for 11 months, 29 years old. University of Michigan Law, top 15% of his class. He had a habit of pushing his glasses up when uncertain and a compulsion for organization that meant her desk was never without the next day's schedule, printed and corners stapled. Before she left each evening, she had liked him within 2 weeks of his starting. Trusted him the way she trusted everyone. Slowly, on the evidence of demonstrated reliability, built up over time. He had demonstrated it consistently, which was what made the discovery harder to sit with. It wasn't dramatic. No document sitting in plain sight. No confession. Just one wrong detail in the wrong place. A line in a preliminary motion filed by Strand's office. One line that referenced a scheduling constraint Naomi had mentioned in an internal email to her clerks. Not a public document. Not discoverable. A logistical note about her November calendar, sent only to her clerks. And Strand's motion had built around that constraint. Specifically, in a way that only made sense if someone had read that email before the motion was drafted. Naomi read the line 4 times, closed the document, opened her email, and checked the recipient list on the original memo. 7 names, all her clerks, all staff who had been with her for at least 3 years. Except Carter Flynn. 11 months. She didn't move for a while. Because part of her wanted to be wrong. She had made an investment of trust. And this was what it felt like when one turned out to be something other than what it appeared. Not rage, not the heat of betrayal, not even hurt in any simple sense. More like arithmetic, recalculated. She picked up her pen, wrote one word on a notepad. Flynn. Underlined it. Put the notepad in her briefcase. Locked the clasp. The next morning, when Carter set her schedule on her desk as always, she looked at it and said, "Thank you, Carter," in exactly the same tone she used every morning. Because he was more useful to her where he was than where he would be. Once he knew she knew. She had learned that from her father. He had worked the floor of a manufacturing plant for 22 years and had a simple rule about equipment that was starting to fail. Let the machine run until you know exactly how it breaks. That way, you're ready when it does. She was going to let Carter Flynn run. The phone call from Eldon Price came on a Thursday evening. She was still at the courthouse. Most of the staff had gone. She was at her desk with the Hale file and a second coffee that had gone cold an hour ago when her cell lit up. Chief Justice Price. She let it ring once, twice, picked up. Judge Reeves. His voice was warm, presidential. Eldon Price had served on the federal bench through 2 administrations and had cultivated a voice that made every room feel like it was doing him a favor by being organized. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I'm at my desk. What can I do for you, Chief Justice? I wanted to check in." A pause that meant something. The Hale case is generating some cases like 10 to. Yes. Another pause. Longer. "Naomi, I want to speak candidly." She set her pen down. "I'm listening," she said. "There are people, at various levels, who feel that this particular assignment may create unnecessary pressure on your office." He chose each word with the care of someone diffusing something. Given the profile of the defendant, the media interest, the complexity of the relationships involved, I want to make sure you feel supported in whatever decision you make going forward, including, if you felt it was appropriate, requesting a reassignment. Naomi let the silence sit for 5 full seconds. "Chief Justice Price," she said, "I want to ask you something directly, of course." "What do you owe?" Very quiet. She could hear him breathing. I don't know what you mean by that, he said. The warm cadence was gone, something flatter in its place. I think you do, she said, a longer silence. The line clicked off. Naomi sat with the dead phone in her hand. She was not surprised. The shape of Price's call had been visible from the first sentence. Men like Price didn't reach out over professional concern. They reached out when someone was waiting for them to. She thought about that for a moment. Then she thought about her mother. 20 years of night shifts. The notebook kept in a locker. The documentation built up slowly, over years, not for immediate use, but to exist. She opened a document on her computer. Typed out every word of the call she could reconstruct. The time. The exact phrasing. The moment the tone shifted, she signed it. Dated it. Moved it to a folder she kept locked and separate from everything else. Then she picked up her phone and called Damon Webb. He answered on the second ring. His voice had the particular alertness of someone who had been half expecting a call. What happened, he said. She told him about Price. 3 minutes. Concise. When she finished, Damon was quiet for a moment. How bad is it, he said. I don't know yet, but I know what it means. Tell me. It means they're not just fighting us in that courtroom. She looked out at the empty parking lot below. A streetlight on the far side flickered twice and steadied. They're working the whole board. So what do? We work faster. She picked up the Hale file, and we trust nobody we haven't already the right to trust. That's a short list. I know it is. The second hearing was 2 weeks later. Victor Hale walked in wearing the same confidence he had carried into the first session, maybe more. The intervening 2 weeks had produced a wave of press coverage that had nothing to do with anything he had said publicly. Long, sympathetic profile pieces about his life story, his Ohio childhood, his decades of building something real. The word persecution appeared in more than one headline, always from an unnamed source close to Hale's team. Naomi had read all of it, set it aside, felt nothing that was useful. The hearing opened. Strand filed a motion regarding the admissibility of a set of internal financial documents. The motion was technically constructed, but rested on a factual representation Naomi knew was incorrect. She had reviewed the underlying documents herself. She looked at Strand. Counselor. The documents you're referencing in Section 3 were produced under a standard discovery order. They don't fall under the exception you're citing. Strand blinked, just once. Your Honor, our reading of the statute. I have the statute in front of me. Motion denied. Strand wrote something down. Said nothing further. Victor at the defense table did not react visibly. But she saw it. The small thing she had started watching for. The slight flex of his jaw. The way a person absorbs an unexpected move and begins recalculating without letting it show on their face. She filed it away. When the session ended and the gallery began to clear, she gathered her papers, allowed herself one look at the defense table. Victor was standing with Strand, listening, nodding slightly. Then, just before she turned to leave, his eyes came up and met hers. 2 seconds. He held it for 2 full seconds, not threatening, not the theatrical contempt of the first hearing. Something else. Something that looked, in the flat light of the courtroom, like the beginning of genuineness. Good, she thought. Let him look. She walked out. That night she went through the background material again, not the legal documents, the financial history. The network of companies and contracts and relationships that Damon's team had spent 2 years mapping. She was looking for Price. For the thread that connected Eldon Price to Victor Hale in a way that had made a 40-year federal judge pick up a phone and ask a sitting colleague to step aside from an active case. She found it at 11:40 p.m., not a smoking gun. Something quieter. A construction contract from 14 years ago, a project that had stalled, a favorable federal court ruling that allowed it to move forward. The judge on that ruling, Eldon Price. The company that benefited, a subsidiary of what would eventually become Hale Industries, 14 years. Price had been carrying this for 14 years. Whether it had started as something he could justify to himself, a ruling that seemed defensible on the merits, or whether he had known from the beginning what it was, she couldn't say. What she knew was that it had compounded. Interest on a debt that couldn't be repaid by any single act, and so never got repaid at all, just carried forward, year after year, obligation layered on obligation. She wrote it down, dated it, added it to the locked folder. She wasn't going to use it yet. Maybe she would never need to, but she needed to understand the full shape of what she was walking into. Because this case was not going to be won in a courtroom alone. Victor Hale had constructed something around himself over 3 decades, not just legal defense. Infrastructure. People who owed him or believed they did, or had been made to feel they did, in that particular way that made the distinction feel irrelevant. He had spent decades ensuring that when accountability came, there would be enough people close enough to absorb the impact. Naomi had the law. She had Damon Webb. She had 2 locked folders and a set of documented facts that nobody on the other side knew she possessed. And she had the one thing Victor Hale had underestimated in every person he had ever faced across a table. The simple, unglamorous refusal to be matched. She closed the file, turned off the lamp, drove home in the dark. 3 days later, her office. Early morning, Carter Flynn knocked twice and came in with the day's schedule. Printed, corner stapled. Margin annotations in the precise handwriting she had asked him to develop 4 months into his tenure. Morning, Judge. He set it on her desk. She looked at the schedule, then at him, 29 years old. He was pushing his glasses up. He did that when he was uncertain. Carter, she kept her voice exactly as it always was. I need you to draft a scheduling note for the Hale team. Let them know the December review session may need to move to the 14th due to a conflict on my calendar. He nodded, started writing. The 14th, she said again, clearly. Got it. She watched him leave. Then she opened a document on her computer and typed 1 line. The 14th is completely clear. She saved it, closed it, waited. If Carter Flynn was running information to Strand's office, and she was now certain enough about that to act on it. Strand would have the December 14th conflict by end of day. He would do something with it. She didn't know exactly what, but she would see it in his next filing, and when she did, she would know 2 things she didn't yet know with complete certainty. The channel was confirmed, and it was clean enough to use in reverse. Her father's rule. Let the machine run until you know how it breaks. She was letting it run. The news broke on a Friday, not about the case. About her. Damon called while she was reviewing motions. His voice had a particular tightness she had learned to recognize over 15 years of working in proximity. You need to see what's online right now. She pulled it up on her phone. 4 outlets. Different angles. Same story. Sources close to the Hale defense allege that Judge Reeves has a documented history of rulings that disproportionately disadvantaged large-scale business defendants. A clip from a speech she had given 3 years ago at a law school, cut to make a general point about corporate accountability, sound like a personal declaration. Comments from an unnamed former colleague suggesting there had always been questions about her impartiality in cases like this. She read all 4 pieces, didn't put the phone down, didn't pick it back up, sat for a moment. She had known something like this was coming. The shape of it had been visible in Price's phone call, in the way Hale had sat at that defense table, watching her like a problem he was already solving. This was the second front, the one that didn't happen where records were kept and rules applied. This was the front where they tried to make her a story. She picked up her pen, made a list, not a list of responses, a list of what she could verify, what was documented, what would hold up if someone looked directly at it. It was a longer list than they were counting on. She called Damon back. I saw it, she said. Here's what we're going to do. That night she stood in her kitchen, same window above the sink. Her mother's photograph on the shelf, scrubs, and a smile that had never learned to be smaller than the feeling behind it. Naomi poured a glass of water, stood at the counter, let the quiet of the house settle. She thought about Victor Hale choosing to keep her on this case. Choosing her specifically. She thought about Carter Flynn and the December 14th that didn't exist. She thought about Eldon Price and 14 years of a debt that had probably started as something barely noticeable. She thought about the machine scene. Patient. Practical. Let it run until you know how it breaks. She knew things now that she hadn't known 3 weeks ago. The shape of the opposition, the channels they were using, the places where they believed they had cover. They didn't know what she knew. That was the only advantage she needed. And it was enough. She looked at her mother's photograph for a moment. Then she rinsed her glass, turned off the kitchen light. Tomorrow, the real work started. The motion arrived on a Monday. Naomi was at her desk before 7. Coffee still hot this time. She had learned, over the past 3 weeks, to make it in a thermos and keep it within reach. The days were getting longer in a way that had nothing to do with daylight. 41 pages. Jeff Strand had filed it at 9:47 the previous night. She knew because the timestamp was on the cover page and she had checked. Not because it mattered legally, because it told her something about the timing, about who had approved it and when and what they expected to happen by morning. She set it on her desk and opened to the first section. The formal heading read, Motion to Recuse. Grounds of demonstrated judicial bias and conflict of interest in the matter of United States v. Hale. She read it straight through. No stops, no annotations in the margins. Just read. It was careful work. She had to give Strand that. It had the particular quality of something constructed by a team over several weeks rather than drafted under pressure, which meant it had been prepared before this case entered its current phase, which meant the courtroom skirmishes, the discovery disputes, the admissibility arguments, even Victor's refusal to stand had never been the point. They had been staging, set up for an audience that was not inside the courtroom. This was the actual move. Motion pulled together 6 threads. A speech she had given in 2021 at a law school symposium, 2 sentences excerpted and lifted entirely free of the surrounding argument. A ruling from 2019 in an unrelated civil case that Strand characterized as evidence of pattern bias. 3 anonymous declarations from individuals identified only as former for professional contacts of Judge Reeves, attesting to statements she had allegedly made in private settings. A financial disclosure form from 4 years ago that Strand argued revealed a conflict of interest with a company that had at some point maintained a contractual relationship with a competitor of Hale Industries. And a 5th thread that was the most carefully constructed of all. An argument that the totality of Naomi's conduct in the proceedings so far, the removal of Hale from the courtroom during the first hearing, the denial of Strand's admissibility motion, constituted a pattern of hostility toward the defense that made impartial continuation of the case impossible. She read that section twice. Then she put the motion down, stood up, walked to the window. Gray morning. The parking lot below half empty at this hour. She was not angry. She had understood for some time that anger was a resource and that she was going to need all of hers for things that actually warranted it. This motion was engineered to produce anger, to make her reactive, to generate the kind of response that could then be held up as further evidence of exactly what Strand was alleging. She was not going to give them that. She went back to her desk, opened a fresh legal pad, wrote 6 headings across the top of the first page, 1 for each thread in the motion. Then she started working through them. Damon Webb arrived at her office at 8:30. He had brought a coffee she hadn't asked for, and a look on his face she recognized. The one that meant he had already read whatever she was reading, and had thoughts he was organizing before he said them out loud. 41 pages, he said. 43 if you count the exhibit index. He sat down, put his coffee on the edge of her desk, did not touch it. They filed this at almost 10 at night. I know. Which means they wanted it in the morning cycle before we had time to. I know, Damon. He looked at her legal pad, at the 6 headings and the 2 pages of notes already beneath them. He picked up his coffee, drank, set it back down. All right, walk me through it. She did, thread by thread. The speech excerpt and what the 4 surrounding paragraphs actually said when read in sequence. The 2019 ruling and its specific statutory basis, and the 2 appellate decisions that had subsequently affirmed the reasoning. The anonymous declarations and what the federal rules governing recusal proceedings actually required. Not someone said something, but documented, verifiable bias, which was a different standard entirely. The financial disclosure and the timeline that made Strand's conflict of interest argument not just incorrect, but factually impossible. That one's what they'll push in the press, she said. The financial angle. It sounds simple. People understand the phrase conflict of interest, even when they don't understand what it means legally. But the company dissolved in 2018. Before I was assigned to this district, my disclosure at the time of appointment correctly reflected no current relationship. She tapped the legal pad. Strand knows that. This isn't an argument he believes in. It's an argument designed to produce a headline before anyone checks the dates. Damon was quiet for a moment. They're not trying to win the motion, no. They're trying to make it a story. They already have. She had gotten 3 calls from journalists before 8 a.m. The story was written before the motion was filed. They were just collecting quotes to fill the gaps. Damon leaned back. What do you want to do? She picked up the motion, held it. I want to respond in open court, on the record. Public hearing, every point addressed, nothing handled quietly in a back room. I want the response to be something anyone can read. That's a risk. Everything from here is a risk. She set the motion down. If I handle this privately, it looks like I have something to protect. If I address it in open court, it becomes part of the public record. They can't edit a transcript. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. When do you want the hearing? End of the week. 4 days. I'll file the response notice. He stood, paused at the door. Naomi. She looked up. For what it's worth, he stopped, adjusted. 15 years of prosecuting federal cases. I've worked alongside a lot of judges. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. She held his gaze. I know, she said. That's why I haven't fired you yet. He laughed, surprised by it. Left. She went back to her notes. She checked the shared clerk's calendar at noon. Not because she needed to schedule something, because she had been checking it daily for 2 weeks. Quietly. The way you monitor a gauge you're not certain is reading accurately. She found it on a Tuesday, and she found it again today. The draft message was still sitting in the shared folder. The one Carter Flynn had composed and not sent through official channels. Addressed to a personal email she didn't recognize, containing the December 14th conflict she had invented. He had drafted it the afternoon. She gave him the information. He was being careful, using the shared clerk account rather than his own, saving to drafts rather than sending in a way that might be logged. But not careful enough, because the draft was still there, visible to anyone with access to the shared account, which included her. She read it again, closed the calendar. Here was the thing about this kind of discovery, the real texture of it that nobody described accurately. It didn't feel like a knife. It felt like arithmetic, like solving a sum you thought was already finished, and finding the total was different from what you'd been working with for 11 months. She had given Carter Flynn access to 11 months of her professional operation. Scheduling, internal communications, the small logistical architecture of how her work actually moved day to day, and he had been using that access for someone else the entire time. She didn't know exactly when it had started. She didn't know how much he had been paid, or whether he had told it himself it was minor. Just scheduling notes, just calendar details, nothing that really mattered. It didn't matter what he had told himself. What mattered was what she did next. She opened a document, typed out everything she had found. The draft email, the timestamp, the exhibit reference, the recipient address, dated it, saved it to her private drive. Then she thought about the channel itself, the mechanics of it. Carter received information from her office, drafted a message, left it in the shared folder. Someone on the other end, not Strand himself, most likely someone lower. Someone with routine access to check the folder, retrieved it and moved it up the chain. A clean, functional channel. One she now controlled completely, as long as Carter Flynn didn't know she was aware it existed. She thought about the December 14th message still sitting in that folder. Then she opened her calendar and started thinking about what she was going to send through the channel next. Not today. She needed to time it correctly. She needed to know what Strand's team would do with what they received, and she needed to be positioned to respond before they could act on it. Her father's rule applied here too. Not just let the machine run, watch where it breaks. Then decide whether to stop it or use the brake. She was going to use it. The letter arrived on a Wednesday evening. She had stayed late. She stayed late most nights now, not because she was behind. She was ahead, actually. Ahead on everything in a way that only happened when pressure sharpened her into something more efficient than her ordinary self. But because the courthouse was quieter after 7, and quiet was where she thought most clearly, she was walking to her car. Third row from the entrance, close enough to the street light that she could see clearly. Something was under the wiper blade. She stopped. White envelope. No stamp, no address, just placed there. Recently, the paper corners weren't damp, and it had been raining since 6. She took a pair of gloves from her coat pocket, a habit she had developed after her first year on the bench, carrying them for occasions she couldn't predict, and picked up the envelope, opened it. One sheet of paper, plain, the kind available at any office supply store. 4 words, handwritten. Stepdowns. She read it once, put it back in the envelope, took out her phone and called Roy Teller. He picked up on the 3rd ring. Roy Teller had been FBI for 22 years and had the voice of a man who had heard most things and found few of them surprising. He was methodical and almost entirely humorless, and she trusted him precisely as much as his track record warranted, which was considerable. "I'm in my parking lot," she said. "Someone left something on my car." "What kind of something?" "A letter. 4 words, unsigned. I used gloves. Don't go back inside. I'll be there in 20, Roy. I'm not going to stand in a parking lot for Naomi." A pause. 20 minutes, he said. She stood by her car. It was cold. She did not go back inside. He arrived in 18. He bagged the envelope. Asked her 4 questions. She answered all 4. He told her he would run the paper, the envelope, the ink, the printing method. He told her that if this was connected to the Hale case, and they both knew it was, then it constituted criminal intimidation of a federal judge, which carried its own serious consequences for whoever had authorized it. "I know," she said. "Do you want someone outside your house?" "Not yet." He looked at her with the flat, assessing gaze he brought to everything. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. But I want this documented completely. Whatever forensics find, whatever the chain of custody looks like, I want a file." He nodded. She drove home. She did not check her mirrors more than usual. She was not going to let that become a habit. That was what the letter was designed to produce, the low-level vigilance that accumulated into fear over days and weeks until a person made decisions based on what they were afraid of rather than what they knew. She knew what she knew. She was going to keep making decisions based on that. Thursday morning, a press conference she had not called. Damon messaged her at 7. Victor Hale's communications team had organized a statement outside the federal courthouse. Not Strand. Not a lawyer. Victor himself. She didn't watch it live. She read the transcript an hour later. He stood in the cold morning without notes and spoke for just under 4 minutes. He talked about 32 years of building a company, about the 11,000 families whose livelihoods came from Hale Industries, about the American principle that every person, regardless of wealth or standing, deserved a fair and impartial judge. And then, carefully, precisely, without using her name, he talked about a judicial system in which personal agendas could be deployed against successful people, in which the appearance of justice could be used as a weapon, in which a judge's existing commitments might override her professional obligations. He never said her name. He didn't need to. Every camera at that press conference knew exactly who he meant. Every headline that afternoon made it explicit, and every person who read those headlines without reading the case record would take away one impression, simple and durable. Victor Hale was being targeted by a judge with something to prove. Naomi read the transcript twice. Then she set it down and thought clearly about what it was. Not new information. The confirmation of a structure she had already mapped. He was building a parallel record outside the courtroom. a documented narrative of grievance that would exist regardless of what happened inside it. If he lost at trial, he would have this. Something to point to. Something to give his allies and supporters, and the next round of lawyers a foundation for arguing the process was compromised before the verdict was reached. The motion to recuse, the press conference, the letter on her car, the profile pieces and the anonymous sources, and the carefully extracted speech clip. All the same move, repeated in different registers, through different channels. Make her the story, make her the problem, make the case about her instead of about him. She picked up her phone, called Damon. "I saw it," he said. "The hearing is tomorrow," she said. "I need you ready, I am, all of it. Every exhibit, every citation. I'm addressing every point in that motion, and I want nothing left unaddressed. Understood?" A pause. "Naomi, how are you doing?" She looked out at the gray sky above the parking lot, streetlight that facilities had been intending to fix for weeks. "I'm working," she said. "That's not what I asked." She was quiet for a moment. "I'll be better when this is done." "Okay," he said, and didn't push. That was one of the things she valued most about Damon Webb. He understood the difference between checking on someone and pressing them. Friday, the recusal hearing. The courtroom was at capacity, not just reporters and gallery observers. Attorneys from other floors who had no case before the court that day. Law clerks on lunch breaks that were not scheduled to start for another hour. 2 federal judges from the floor above, seated in the gallery in a way that was unusual enough to register. Everyone had come to watch. Good. She wanted them watching. Naomi came in at exactly 9. Everyone rose. She sat, arranged her papers, looked at Strand across the room, then at Hale beside him. Victor was watching her. She looked at her papers. "This hearing addresses the defense's motion to recuse filed Monday," she said. "I will allow Mr. Strand to present supporting argument, after which I will respond. We will be methodical and complete, and we will be entirely on the record. Mr. Strand, you have the floor." Strand rose. He was good. She watched him work and acknowledged the craft of it even while she thought he tracked exactly what each element was designed to do. He presented the 6 threads with precision, measured, professional, no grandstanding. He let the arguments carry the weight and trusted the weight to be enough. He spoke for 22 minutes. When he sat down, the room was very quiet. Naomi uncapped her pen. She had spent 4 days on her response. Not writing a speech. Writing facts, or with forces references and timestamps and verified citations. The difference, line by line, between what Strand had argued and what the record actually showed. She started with the 2021 speech. She read the full passage from which Strand had excerpted 2 sentences. Read it into the record slowly, so the courtroom could hear the difference between 2 sentences in isolation and the same 2 sentences inside the argument they belonged to. She did not editorialize. She just read it. Then the 2019 ruling. She cited the statutory basis for it, the appellate decisions affirming it. The specific question of standing the ruling had addressed, which had nothing to do with the identity of the parties, and everything to do with a narrow procedural issue that Strand had declined to mention in his motion. Then the anonymous declarations. She addressed their admissibility under the federal rules governing recusal proceedings. The legal standard was not that an unidentified person had said something negative about a judge. The standard was documented, verifiable bias. Anonymous hearsay from individuals with no disclosed relationship to the proceedings did not reach that standard. She cited 3 binding cases. Then the financial disclosure. She went through it line by line. The company. Its dissolution date in 2018. Her appointment date to this district. The timeline that made Strand's argument not merely incorrect, but factually impossible to construct honestly. 12 minutes in, she paused, looked at Strand. Then at Hale. Victor Hale was watching her, and she could see it clearly now. The thing she had first caught after the admissibility ruling in the second hearing, not the theatrical contempt of the first session, not anger. Something that looked, in the flat courtroom light, like genuine attention. The kind a person paid when they were revising an assumption. She looked back at her papers. Finally, she said, the defense argues that my conduct in these proceedings demonstrates a pattern of hostility. They point to Mr. Hale's removal from the courtroom during the initial hearing and the denial of the admissibility motion. She turned a page. The record shows that Mr. Hale was removed because he refused, twice, to comply with a protocol that applies equally to every person who appears before me, regardless of net worth, professional, standing, or public profile. The record also shows that the admissibility motion was denied because it contained a factual misrepresentation of the applicable statute, which identified by reading the statute. She looked up. That is not hostility. That is the job. She capped her pen. The motion to recuse is denied on all grounds. The ruling is on the record and available in full by end of day. Any appeal follows standard appellate procedure. She looked at Strand. Is there anything further? Strand stood. His face was controlled in the way of a professional who had practiced controlling it. No, Your Honor. Then we're adjourned. She struck the gavel. The room exhaled all at once, the sound of something that had been held under pressure, finally releasing. In the hallway afterward, Damon fell into step beside her. 12 minutes, he said. 43 pages. He shook his head, not quite suppressing something. She was not smiling, because in the last moment before she struck the gavel, she had seen something at the defense table. Victor and Strand in close conference, heads bent together. Strand's hand moving to his briefcase, opening it. A folder passed between them, the posture of both men shifting in a way she had learned to read. They had already moved to whatever came next. She walked back to her chambers, sat down, opened her calendar, thought about Carter Flynn. The channel had been confirmed 2 days ago. Strand's office had filed a supplemental exhibit notice on Saturday morning, 2 days after she gave Flynn the witness name. 1 day after Flynn had almost certainly moved it through the draft folder. The exhibit notice referenced documents pertaining to that specific witness's business dealings. They had taken the bait cleanly and moved on it within 48 hours, which told her the channel was fast, direct, reliable from their end. She called Flynn into her office, told him she needed a scheduling note drafted for the Hale team. Mentioned, as if incidentally, that she was planning an evidentiary hearing the following Thursday at which she intended to address a specific witness from the prosecution's list. She named the witness. The name was real. The witness was real. The planned hearing was not. Flynn wrote it down, said he would draft the note, left. She watched the door close. Then she opened her email and sent Damon Webb 2 sentences. No subject line. She told him which witness to prepare, the one she had just named to Flynn. She told him to be ready for what came next, not the fake hearing. The real consequence of the fake hearing, which was that she was about to find out exactly what Strand's team planned to do with that name, and she would be positioned to respond before they finished planning. She put her phone down. Late afternoon, light through the window, thin and flat, the parking lot below. A maintenance crew finally working on a street light that had been flickering for weeks. They were moving. She needed to move faster. The call came at 9 that night. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Judge Reeves. A woman's voice. Measured and careful in the way of someone who had been rehearsing the first sentence. Yes, who is this? A pause. Long enough that she thought the line might be failing. Then, my name isn't important right now. What's important is that I have information about my husband's case. Information I think you should know exists. Naomi was very still. Mrs. Hale, she said. Another pause. Smaller. I'm not calling to interfere. Diana Hale's voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. Not distress exactly. More the particular flatness of someone who had been making a decision for a long time and had only just finished making it. I'm not calling to make a deal. I'm calling because I've watched this for longer than you know. What he does, how he does it. Mrs. Hale. Naomi kept her voice level. I need to advise you that direct communication with me outside of proper channels is procedurally. I'm not giving you anything tonight. A beat. I'm telling you that something exists, and that when the time is right, you should ask the right person the right question. Mr. Webb. Your prosecutor. He should ask about the accounts. The accounts, Naomi said. He'll understand when I explain it to him. Another pause. The careful kind. The kind a person's made when they had been holding something for a long time and were only now allowing it to come out. My husband thinks I don't know. He has been wrong about that for a very long time. The line went quiet. Then it clicked off. Naomi sat with the phone in her hand. Then she called Damon. He picked up on the second ring. She could hear him eating. He stopped when she started talking. She told him about the call, word for word. Every pause. When she finished, 3 seconds of silence. Diana Hale, he said. Yes. Reached out to you directly. She was careful about it. She didn't give me anything specific, just a direction. The accounts, Damon said. That's what she said. She could hear him thinking. The specific texture of Damon Webb working through something. A silence with weight and movement inside it. This changes things, he said. Maybe. We don't know what she has yet. But she has something. And she's willing to point us toward it. Whether she delivers is a different question. Naomi looked at the dark window, her own reflection unclear in the glass. Why would she do this right now? After tonight's hearing, Damon was quiet for a moment. Then, because she watched you win tonight. Naomi said nothing. She watched her husband's best move get taken apart in 12 minutes on the public record, Damon said. And then she picked up her phone. Naomi thought about Diana Hale's photograph, the particular stillness in every public image, the expression of someone who had learned, a long time ago, that the safest response to being watched was not to move. Contact her tomorrow, Naomi said. Quietly. Roy Teller should be in the room. Everything documented from the first conversation. We don't cut corners on this one. Understood. And Damon. She looked at the window. Whatever she had, however good it is, we verify independently before we use a single piece of it in that courtroom. We don't take her word for anything. We confirm everything ourselves. I know. I mean it. I know you do, he said. That's why I'm still here. She put the phone down. Outside, the city was doing what it always did. Moving, indifferent, going about its life. Somewhere across it, Victor Hales was in whatever room men like him occupied when they weren't performing certainty in a courtroom. Planning the next move, reviewing the next filing, working the board in the direction he had been working it for 30 years. He didn't know his wife had just called the judge. He didn't know about the channel running through Carter Flynn, or that the information flowing through it was now coming from Naomi's desk by design rather than accident. He didn't know what she had in the locked folder with Price's name on it. He thought he had her cornered. She understood why he thought that. He had worked methodically to corner her, and by the visible evidence of the last 6 weeks he had succeeded. The press, the motion, the letter, the pressure from above. From the outside it looked exactly like a woman running out of room. She was not running out of room. She had been building room this entire time. She turned off the lamp, put on her coat. Tomorrow Damon would call Diana Hale. Roy Teller would document everything. The false hearing notice would work its way through Carter Flynn's draft folder and into Strand's office, and produce a response she would be ready for. Every piece was in motion. She walked out of the courthouse into the night air, cold and clear. The repaired streetlight burning steady above the parking lot. No flicker, just clean, even light across the empty rows. She walked to her car, got in, drove home. The thought arrived at 1:30 in the morning, fully formed. Naomi sat up in the dark, not startled, not dragged out of sleep by anxiety, just awake, the way she got awake on the cases that mattered, her mind continuing to work in the hours. Her body was supposed to be resting, arriving at conclusions her conscious self hadn't caught up to yet. Diana Hale had called on a Friday night, after the recusal hearing, not before it, after. She sat with that in the dark for a long time, because the timing meant something specific. Diana had not called because the case was going badly for Victor. The case had been going badly for Victor for weeks. Diana had called after watching her husband's most carefully constructed legal move get dismantled on the public record in 12 minutes. After watching Jeff Strand sit down with nothing. After watching 41 pages of motion. reduced to a denied ruling that anyone could read. Diana had watched that happen, and then she had picked up a phone, which meant something had shifted. Not in the case. In Diana's calculation about what the future looked like. A woman who had spent 24 years watching a man operate at Victor Hale's level didn't make a call like that on impulse. She made it because something had changed in her understanding of where things were going and what that meant for her, specifically. Naomi needed to know what had changed. She got up, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with the Hale background file, not the legal documents, the personal history. Everything Damon's team had compiled on the people around Victor rather than on Victor himself. She had read it twice before. She read it again now, slower, looking for the thread she might have moved past too quickly. She found it at 3 a.m., not dramatic. A single line in a financial summary. 4 weeks ago, before the recusal hearing, before Strand filed the motion, before any of the recent escalation, Hale Industries had restructured a set of internal holding entities. The restructuring had moved a significant portion of Victor's personal assets into trusts and accounts, registered in names other than his own or Diana's. She read that line 3 times. Then she understood why Diana had called. Victor had moved the assets before the verdict, before conviction, while the case was still active and the outcome still technically uncertain. He had structured everything in a way that would protect the money regardless of what happened in the courtroom. Protected from the government, yes, but also protected from Diana. In a scenario where Victor went to prison, Diana would emerge from 24 years of marriage with a fraction of what she believed she was entitled to. He had already decided to leave her behind. She just hadn't known it until recently. Until something, a document she wasn't supposed to see, a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear, a number that didn't add up, had made it clear. Naomi closed the file, sat for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and sent Damon one message. Call me at 6. I know why she did it. Damon called at 5:58. She told him what she had found in the financial summary. 2 minutes? He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. She's protecting herself, he said. She's surviving, Naomi said. There's a difference. Okay. Does it matter why she's doing it? It matters for how we handle her, Naomi said. We don't treat her like a whistleblower acting out of conscience, because she isn't. We treat her like someone making a rational decision about her own interests, because that's what she is. She'll be more reliable that way. And the defense can't characterize her as emotionally motivated if her motivation is entirely practical. Damon absorbed that. Then, Roy has the meeting set for this afternoon. 2 o'clock. His field office. She asked for you to not be there? She asked Roy directly. She doesn't want to meet the judge. She wants distance from the bench, Naomi said. Which is smart. Make sure everything is documented from the moment she walks in. Audio, written record, Roy's notes in real time. I want a complete file before she leaves that room, already planned. And Damon, whatever she brings, however good it looks. We verify every piece independently before it goes anywhere near the courtroom. Her word is a starting point, not an end point. Understood, he said. What are you going to do today? She looked at the stack of files on the edge of her desk, 3 other cases that had been patient long enough. I'm going to be a judge, she said. I have work that's been waiting. She made it through 2 hours of the other cases before Carter Flynn knocked. He came in with the afternoon schedule. As always, corner stapled, margins annotated, the reliable architecture of 11 months. She looked at him. He was tired today. There were shadows under his eyes she hadn't seen last week. His shoulders carried something he was working to keep out of his posture and not entirely succeeding. She wondered if he suspected, if something in the way she moved through the last few weeks had shifted in a way he could sense, even if he couldn't name it. She had been careful. But she had been carrying knowledge for 3 weeks, and sometimes the weight of a thing changed how you move through rooms even when you were doing everything to move the same as always. Morning, Judge. He set the schedule on her desk. She looked at it, then at him, Carter. She kept her voice exactly as it always was. The pre-trial conference for the Hale matter is moving to Wednesday at 10. Please update the calendar and send confirmation to both parties." He nodded, wrote it down, and the witness scheduling note from last week. "Has that gone out?" A beat. She would have missed it a month ago. "Went out Friday." He said, "Good." She looked back at her files. "That'll be all." He left. She waited 4 minutes. Then, she pulled up the motion history and checked the timestamps on Strand's recent filings. Strand's office had filed a supplemental exhibit notice on Saturday morning, 2 days after she gave Flynn the witness name. The notice referenced a set of documents pertaining specifically to business dealings involving that witness. Targeted. Deliberate. They had moved on the witness within 48 hours of receiving the name. The channel was confirmed clean, fast, reliable from their end. She opened her email and sent Damon one line. They took it. "Be ready for Wednesday?" Damon called at 4:20. "Tell me," she said, a pause. The kind that meant he was choosing how to begin. "She brought documents," he said. "What kind?" "Bank records, internal transfer records. A set of communications between Victor and someone named Gerald Aldridge, who ran the financial division of Hale Industries until 2019. He paused again. "And a recording." Naomi was still. "What recording?" Diana made it herself, 8 months ago. In her own home, Victor and Aldridge and a third person from the contracting side discussing how to restructure the accounts before the federal investigation reached a level that would make restructuring difficult. She recorded it on her phone. Victor didn't know she was in the house. Naomi set her pen down. She recorded it in her own home, her own phone, her own house. One-party consent jurisdiction. Roy confirmed it on the spot. Naomi was quiet for a moment. She had learned to handle moments like this without rushing into them, without letting the significance of what she was hearing pull her out of the careful, methodical thinking the significance required. Did Roy authenticate the documents? On the spot. The recording needs lab verification, but Roy said nothing about it reads as altered or edited. He's sending it tonight. Timeline for lab results? He's pushing for 48 hours. She'll have something by Sunday. Good. She looked at the window. Late afternoon. The parking lot below quiet at this hour. Most of the day, staff already gone, have him push harder. This is priority. Already done. She stayed with the information for another moment. Then, did she say anything at the end? Before she left. Another pause. She said she wasn't doing it for justice, Damon said. She was specific about that. She said she wanted it on record that she wasn't. He stopped finding the words. She said she spent 24 years believing in a version of him that turned out to be something he put on in the morning, like a piece of clothing. And she said she wasn't doing this for justice. She was doing it so that when it was over, she could look at herself and know she had finally done one thing that was entirely her own. Naomi was quiet for a long time. "Put that on record," she said, exactly as she said it. "I will." Up. She sat at her desk. Outside, the city kept moving, indifferent, regular. A woman walking a dog along the sidewalk across the street, unhurried in the cold. The ordinary machinery of an evening doing what evenings did, while somewhere across Diana Hale was sitting with the weight of what she had just put in motion. Naomi understood that weight, not the specific version of it that Diana was carrying, but the shape of it. The knowledge that some decisions couldn't be unmade, that you could spend a very long time building toward a moment, and then the moment arrived, and you had to live in the aftermath of it for the rest of whatever came next. She picked up her pen, got back to work. Wednesday. Pre-trial conference. Victor Hale walked into the courtroom differently. Naomi noticed it immediately, not in any dramatic way. Nothing the cameras in the gallery would catch, or the reporters in the back rows would be able to describe later. A small thing, the angle of his shoulders, the speed at which he sat down, faster than usual, with less of the deliberate theatrical weight he had performed in the earlier sessions. Something had shifted in him. She didn't know if he knew about Diana, if word had reached him through whatever channels men like Victor used to stay informed. or whether what she was seeing was simply the accumulated effect of 6 weeks of proceedings going in a direction he hadn't fully anticipated. She proceeded. The conference was organizational. Timelines, witness schedules, the structure of evidence submission for the trial proper. Strand was professional and efficient and revealed nothing. He had been in federal courtrooms for 4 decades and could conduct business across from a judge who had just denied his recusal motion as if it had never been filed. She could respect the discipline of that. Didn't change anything about where they were. Halfway through, Strand raised a question about the witness she had named to Flynn, framed carefully as a scheduling concern about availability for cross-examination. Nothing that showed the supplemental exhibit filing. Nothing that revealed what he had done with the name when he received it. She addressed it neutrally, confirmed the scheduling window, moved on. She watched Victor during this exchange. He wasn't looking at Strand. He was looking at her. Not the performance. The real kind of looking. The kind that had started after the admissibility ruling and had deepened with each passing week into something she could only describe as a man revising a fundamental assumption he had been operating on for a long time. She let him look. As the room cleared after the conference, Strand gathered his papers with methodical precision. Victor stood, adjusted his jacket, started toward the door, then stopped, turned. His lawyer was at his elbow in a moment. Victor held up one hand, not aggressive, quiet. He looked at Naomi. She was still at the bench, making a note. Judge Reeves, she looked up. My father worked a factory floor in Ohio for 30 years, he said. His voice was different from his courtroom voice, less constructed. I watched him do it. I watched how people who had less than him treat him like he was worth less than them. He paused. I decided when I was young that I was never going to let that happen to me. The courtroom was nearly empty. 3 people remaining in the gallery, Strand at his elbow, 1 bailiff by the door. Naomi looked at him. Mr. Hale. She kept her voice level. I'm going to stop you there. Anything you say in these proceedings is part of the record. I know that. Then you understand that what you've just told me has no bearing on the charges before the court. He held her gaze. Something moved across his face, not contrition, not the anger that had characterized the early sessions. Something in the territory between those things that she didn't have a clean word for. I know that too, he said. Strand took his arm. Victor let himself be guided toward the door without resistance. She watched them go. She wrote nothing about the exchange. It wasn't a legal event. It was a man at 59 years old, in the middle of watching a structure he had spent 3-decade building begin to come apart. Saying something he had probably never said to anyone in a professional setting because there had never been a reason to. Because for 30 years the structure had held and no one had ever gotten close enough to require him to explain it. She understood what his father's story meant to him. She even understood, in a way that cost her nothing and changed nothing, how a person could take a real wound from childhood and build something genuinely impressive out of it, and somewhere in the building lose track of the line between what they had earned and what they felt entitled to take. Understanding it didn't change what the record showed. She struck the gavel on the empty bench, went back to her chambers. Friday morning. Roy Teller called at 6:55. Lab confirmed the recording, he said. No alteration, no editing. Voice analysis matches Victor Hale and the 2 individuals Diana identified. Everything holds. Naomi let out a slow breath. We're entering it today, she said. Damon's motion is already filed. You'll have the full exhibit package by 8. Good. She paused. The letter from my car. Anything? Roy was quiet for a moment. Printer was commercial grade, available at multiple office supply retailers in the metro area. No fingerprints on the paper or envelope, but the ink analysis came back this morning. Specific formula. Nettoer range than standard commercial ink. We traced the likely printer model to a unit registered to a holding company that Hale Industries used for administrative offices until 2 years ago. Naomi was still. Enough to charge someone? Not directly, Roy said, not on its own, but enough to establish connection. It goes in the file, put it in the file, already done. She hung up, sat for a moment with that, the letter on her car. 4 words, step down or else. She had stood in a cold parking lot in the rain and read it and put it in an evidence bag, and called Roy Teller and not gone back inside. She had not stepped down. She had documented. She had kept building the file, piece by piece, the way her mother had kept the notebook in her locker for 3 years, not for immediate use, just to have, because having was the difference between being heard and being dismissed. She had the file. Every piece of it. She opened her desk drawer, pulled out the locked folder with Eldon Price's name on it, the construction contract from 14 years ago, the favorable ruling, the thread that ran between that ruling and the phone call Price had made to her, asking her to step aside. She looked at it, then she put it back, closed the drawer. Not today. Maybe not ever. Price was a different kind of problem, and one she was going to handle differently from everything else. What he had done was real, but the decision about what to do with it was not hers to make alone, and she was not going to make it under the pressure of an active case. Some things required more space than a verdict could provide. Friday. Trial session. The courtroom was at capacity before 9. Word had moved through the legal community the way it always moved, through clerk offices and hallway conversations, and the particular telegraph of people who paid close attention to case calendars. Something was happening today. The gallery was full, 3 extra bailiffs on duty, 2 sketch artists near the front, reporters in every available press seat. Victor Hale sat at the defense table, Strand beside him. 3 members of Strand's team arranged in the row behind. Victor's posture was controlled. His face was controlled. He was doing what he had always done in this room, performing certainty. Damon Webb stood at the prosecution table with 2 of his investigators and a laptop open to the exhibit filing. Naomi came in at exactly 9. Everyone rose. She sat, looked at the room, all of it. The full gallery, the reporters, the attorneys at their tables, the sketch artists already moving their hands. Victor was watching her. She looked at her papers. This session addresses the prosecution's motion to enter additional documentary and audio evidence under Federal Rule of Evidence 901, she said. Mr. Webb, present your motion. Damon stepped forward. He was controlled and thorough and precise. He had spent 2 years building toward this, and it showed in the way he moved through the presentation. Not rushed, not performing, just methodically laying one piece on top of the next until the structure was visible. He walked the court through the financial documents first. The account structures, the transfer patterns, the way money had moved between entities over time, in a configuration that was not accidental and was not legitimate. Strand objected twice. Naomi ruled on both quickly, sustained one on narrow grounds, denied the second. Then Damon moved to the recording. He laid the foundation carefully, the circumstances under which it was obtained, the authentication process. Roy Teller's sworn written testimony submitted that morning, the lab confirmation, the voice analysis. He covered every element of admissibility before he played a single second of audio. The courtroom was very quiet. The recording played through speakers set up for the purpose. Victor Hale's voice filled the room. Unhurried, comfortable. The voice of a man in his own home who believed that everything around him was exactly as he had arranged it to be. 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Naomi watched the room as it played. She watched the reporters, pens and keyboards moving. The sketch artists, hands working fast. She watched Strand's team behind the defense table. One of them had gone pale in the way of someone hearing something they had hoped would not exist. She watched Victor Hale. He sat completely still through all 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Hands flat on the desk, eyes forward, not looking at the speakers, not looking at Strand, not looking at her, looking at the middle distance in the way of a man recalculating from a starting point he could no longer locate. When it finished, the courtroom held its silence for a moment. Then Strand rose. Your Honor, we object to the admissibility of this recording on grounds that I've reviewed your written objections, Mr. Strand, Naomi said. I've also reviewed the applicable statute on consent-based recording in this jurisdiction. The recording was made at a private residence by an individual present in that residence at the time. That satisfies the one-party consent requirement under applicable federal law. Your objection is overruled. She looked at Damon. The evidence is admitted. Someone in the gallery exhaled, not loudly. But the room was quiet enough that she heard it. Victor Hale had not moved. She looked at him. He was looking at the surface of the defense table. Not at Strand, not at her. At the wood grain of the table in front of him. A man staring at something that wasn't there, or at something that was there and that he was only now fully seeing. She had seen this before. Not often. The moment when a person understood, completely, without remaining ambiguity, that the story they had been living inside. The one where they were in control, where the outcome was manageable, where the board could always be worked into the right configuration, was finished. She felt nothing theatrical about it, no surge of triumph, nothing that could be called satisfaction in any uncomplicated sense. What she felt was the particular quiet of something being finished that had needed to be finished. The specific, unglamorous relief of a long piece of work reaching its end. She struck the gavel. "We'll recess until Tuesday," she said, closing arguments at 9 a.m. The weekend was strange. For the first time in 8 weeks, there was nothing urgent. The evidence was in. The motions were resolved. The closing arguments were Damon's and Strand's work, and she had reviewed the case record thoroughly enough that she knew the shape of what was coming. She cleaned her apartment on Saturday, the real kind of cleaning that happened when you had been neglecting it because there was always something more pressing. She did laundry. She cooked a meal that required more than 20 minutes and ate it at her kitchen table without reading anything. Sunday afternoon, she called her mother. Her mother answered on the third ring, 71 years old, lived 30 minutes away. They talked every Sunday and sometimes Saturday when something had happened that needed the particular frequency her mother operated on. "How's the case?" her mother said. "Almost done. You sound tired." "I am." "Are you eating?" "Yes, Mama." "Because last time I'm eating," Naomi said. "I promise." Her mother was quiet for a moment. The comfortable kind of quiet that came from decades of knowing someone well enough to not fill every space. "I saw your name in the news," her mother said. "I know." They weren't being kind. No, they weren't. "Did it bother you?" Naomi thought about that honestly, the way her mother deserved. "For about 10 minutes, she said. Her mother made a sound, somewhere between acknowledgement and amusement. "Good, a beat. Come for dinner Tuesday. After it's over. "I will. I'll make something good." "You always do." She hung up, sat on her couch. The afternoon light came through the window at an angle she rarely saw because she was rarely home in the afternoon. It crossed the floor in a long flat rectangle and moved slowly as the hours passed. She let it move. She thought about Victor Hale looking at the surface of the defense table, while his own voice filled the courtroom. She thought about Diana Hale sitting in Roy Teller's field office, placing a hard drive on the table, saying she wasn't doing it for just X. She thought about Eldon Price and a phone call and 14 years of a debt he'd never been able to fully repay, and now never would. She thought about Carter Flynn pushing his glasses up in the doorway of her office every morning for 11 months. Reliable, organized. Someone else's the entire time. She thought about the letter on her car in the rain. Then she stopped thinking about all of it, because there would be time for it later, for the reckoning with what it meant and what it had cost, and whether she would have done anything differently. That was future work. Right now, there was just the light moving across the floor, and the silence of her apartment, and the fact that, for one afternoon, nothing was required of her. She let that be enough. Tuesday, closing arguments. Damon went first, 40 minutes. He was excellent in the particular way that came from 2 years of living inside a case. Not just knowing the facts, but understanding them, understanding why each piece mattered, and how to make that clarity visible to 12 people who had been listening for weeks. He walked the jury through the financial documents, the transfer records, the recording, the testimony of 3 cooperating witnesses who had already entered guilty pleas. He connected each piece to each specific charge with the precision of someone who had made very sure at every stage that every connection was airtight. He sat down. Strand stood. He was good. He had always been good, and he remained good even now, even working with what he had, which was considerably less than what he'd started with. He gave the jury questions to sit with. He talked about the burden of proof. He talked about the sources of evidence and the motivations of cooperating witnesses and the nature of the recordings and what it meant to make decisions about a person's life based on material obtained outside formal channels. He was doing what he could. It was less than it would have needed to be. She watched the jury. 12 people. She had learned over years that reading a jury was an act of imagination more than observation. You could watch their faces through every session and construct a theory of how they were processing everything and be wrong about every one of them. So she watched without predicting. Just watched. Strand finished at 11:44. "Thank you, Mr. Strand." She looked at the room. "The jury will begin deliberation at 1 p.m. We'll recess until then." In the recess, Damon came to her chambers. He sat in the chair across from her desk and looked like a man who had just finished running something long. "How do you feel?" she said. "Like I need a week somewhere quiet. You'll get it. How do you feel?" She considered that honestly. "Like I want them to come back fast," she said, "and like I know I can't make them." He nodded. "Whatever happens in that room." "We did it right," she said. "We did it right," he agreed. They sat with that for a moment. "Go eat something," she said. "You look like you haven't since Thursday." He laughed. Short and real. Stood, went. She looked at her desk, the legal pad with its columns and underlines and 8 weeks of organized thinking made visible on yellow paper. She picked up the pad, put it in her drawer. Then she opened the next file on her desk. A completely different case, different parties, different facts, different questions. She read the first page, then the second. She was still reading when Damon's message came through at 5:35. They're back. The courtroom at 5:47 had the quality of a room that had been waiting. Everyone rose when she came in. She sat, looked at the jury foreperson. A woman in her mid-50s who had occupied the front left seat throughout the trial and had given nothing of herself away in all that time. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." The bailiff walked the form to the bench. Naomi took it. "Read it." She had read verdict forms hundreds of times. It never felt like anything particular in the moment of reading. Just words on paper. Words that would mean everything in the next 60 seconds and had been simply words on paper until then. She handed the form back. On the count of federal fraud, the foreperson read, "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty." Victor Hale did not move. On the count of bribery of a federal official, "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty." Strand sat completely still beside him. On the count of conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation, "We find the defendant guilty." 3 more counts, all guilty. When the foreperson sat down, the room held its silence for one long moment. Then the gallery began to move. Reporters reaching for phones, the low collective sound of something that had been compressed for a long time beginning to release, murmurs, building toward noise. Naomi looked at Victor Hale. He was looking at the table, the same place he had looked when the recording played. But then, slowly, he raised his head, and he looked at her. She held it. 2 seconds. The same 2 seconds she had given him in the very first hearing when he had decided, with great deliberation, whether she was worth standing for. Then she looked at her papers. "The jury is thanked and dismissed," she said. "Sentencing will be scheduled within 60 days. The defendant will be remanded to custody pending that hearing." She looked at the bailiffs. Victor Hale stood before they reached him. Put his hands out without being asked. He had known. She could see that he had known for a while now. The question of when exactly the knowing had arrived, she would never have an answer to. As the bailiffs moved him toward the door, he paused at the defense table. Said something to Strand she couldn't hear. Strand nodded. Once. Victor turned toward the aisle. He moved through the clearing room without hurrying. She was still at the bench when he reached the gallery entrance. He did not look back at her. He walked through the door. It closed. Naomi struck the gavel one final time. Court is adjourned. 3 days later, the letter arrived. Official envelope. Seal of the Federal Judicial Conduct and Disability Committee on the front. She opened it at her desk on a Thursday morning with the next case file already open beside it. She had been expecting it, not with dread, with the particular readiness of someone who has already decided how they intend to respond to something before it arrives. The committee was opening a review. The question was whether her handling of Carter Flynn, specifically, her decision not to report the leak upon discovery, and her use of Flynn as a conduit for controlled misinformation, constituted a violation of the Judicial Code of Conduct. She read every word. Then she put the letter down, picked up her pen, began to write. Not a defense, a record. Her own complete account of every decision she'd made regarding Carter Flynn from the moment of discovery to the moment she'd provided Roy Teller with the full documentation, when she had found the draft email, what she had known and when, what she had chosen to do, and the specific reasoning behind each choice. The consultation with Roy that had preceded the first controlled information. The documentation she had maintained throughout. Every step, every date, every decision and its reason. She wrote for 2 hours. Then she printed the document, read it through once, signed it, dated it, filed it with the committee before end of day. No lawyer, no intermediary, no carefully managed statement reviewed by 3 people before submission. Her own words, her own account, because there was nothing to hide. She had walked a line, and she was aware she had walked it. Reasonable people could look at what she had done and disagree about where exactly the line should be drawn. She was prepared to make her case to people who disagreed. That was how the process was supposed to work, and she was not going to exempt herself from it because she happened to believe she was right. Carter Flynn was arrested on a Thursday 2 weeks after the verdict. Federal charges, unauthorized disclosure of judicial proceeding. He had retained counsel and been released on bail and had a long process ahead of him. She heard about it from Roy Teller, said nothing particular in response. She had liked Carter Flynn. The work he had done for 11 months had been genuine work, well done. She didn't know when the other thing had started or how he had arrived at the decision to do it. She might never know. That was one of the permanent facts of this kind of betrayal. You rarely got the full explanation, and even when you did it, rarely made the arithmetic come out to something that felt resolved. She recalculated, filed it, moved forward. Chief Justice Eldon Price announced his retirement 4 weeks after the verdict. A brief written statement, health reasons, time with his family. His last official day was at the end of the month. She read the statement once, folded it, opened the locked drawer, put it on top of the folder with his name on it, left both there. Some things did not require action. Some things resolved themselves through the simple passage of time and the weight of their own reality. And the most important skill was knowing which kind you were dealing with. She closed the drawer, locked it. The committee's response came 5 weeks after she submitted her account. A Tuesday afternoon, she was in her office with 3 active cases on her docket, the Hale sentencing scheduled for the following month, and Carter Flynn's case proceeding through the system on a separate track that had nothing to do with her. She opened the envelope. Read it. They had reviewed her submission in full, the complete timeline, the documentation, the consultation record with Roy Teller, the legal analysis she had included regarding a judge's authority to manage information within their own chambers during an active proceeding. The committee found no violation of the Judicial Code of Conduct. Unanimous. The final paragraph noted that her method of documentation throughout the Flynn situation was being entered into the committee's reference materials as a model for handling similar circumstances in future cases. She read that paragraph twice. Then she folded the letter, set it on her desk, sat for a moment. Not celebrating, not relieved in the way she had expected to be relieved when she had imagined this moment during the harder weeks. Something quieter than relief. The particular quality of having gone all the way through something difficult, and arriving on the other side without having lost the thing that made it worth going through. She picked up her phone, called Damon. "Committee cleared me," she said when he answered. "I know. Roy called me an hour ago, of course he did." She could hear him smiling without seeing it. "How do you feel?" he said. She looked out her window. The parking lot. The street light that had flickered for 2 months and that facilities had finally repaired last week. Burning clean and steady above the empty rows. "I feel like going home," she said. He laughed. "The real kind. Go home, Naomi, I will." She hung up, sat for a moment longer. Then she gathered her things, locked her desk, put on her coat, turned off her lamp, walked down the hallway with her footsteps quiet on marble, the building empty at this hour, just her moving through it. She pushed through the main door, cold air, clear sky. The last of the light going in the west, the east already dark. That particular hour that belonged to neither day nor night, but held something of both. She stood at the top of the courthouse steps for just a moment, not reviewing anything, not arriving at conclusions, just standing in the cold air at the end of a long thing, letting the outside be outside. Then she went down the steps, got in her car, drove to her mother's house. Her mother opened the door before she knocked, standing in the warm light of the doorway, watching for her the way she had been watching for her since before Naomi could remember. The way a person watched for someone they had decided, a long time ago, to keep watching for regardless of how much time or distance accumulated between the watching and the arriving. "Come in," her mother said. "It's cold." She went in. The house smelled of something in the oven and something on the stove, and the particular combination that had meant home for 40 years, and would mean it until something stopped her from walking through this door. Her mother took her coat without being asked, looked at her face the way she always looked at her face, reading the parts that didn't show. "You look tired," she said. "I am. But okay." Naomi thought about that, gave it the honest consideration it deserved. "Yeah," she said. "I think so." Her mother nodded once, didn't push. "Sit down," she said. "It's almost ready." Naomi sat at the kitchen table, same chair. The same window above the sink with the same view of the backyard, where her father had built a bird feeder 30 years ago, now maintained by entirely different birds who knew nothing about who had built it or why. Her mother moved through the kitchen with the ease of someone who knew every inch of a space without needing to think about it anymore. "That man," her mother said without turning around. "The one in the case. He was convicted." "I saw." A pause while she opened the oven. "Did he think he was going to win?" "For a long time," Naomi said. "Yes." "What changed?" Naomi looked at the table, at the ring near the edge where something had been set down hot 30 years ago and left its mark in the wood, still there. Still exactly the same shape it had always been. "He forgot," she said, "that not everyone has a price." Her mother made a sound that meant she understood completely. She set a dish on the counter, turned around, looked at her daughter. "Are you going back?" she said. "Tomorrow morning. Same time?" "Same time," she said. Her mother nodded, turned back to the stove. "Good," she said. "Just that. Good." Outside the window, the backyard was dark, the bird feeder a silhouette against the fence, the night clear and cold, and entirely indifferent to everything that had happened in the last 8 weeks, and entirely unchanged by it. Naomi sat at the table. Her mother cooked. The house was warm. She let that be enough.